أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to our second class on chapter 3. Last week I have asked you to practice drawing the flowchart symbols. How many of you have done that? How many of you have practiced drawing the flowchart symbols? Let me hear from you. First response, I didn't. Anyone who has practiced? Omar says he wanted to practice, but he forgot. Hamad practiced it, mashallah, very good. Okay. So I'm going to go through the flowcharts using the symbols that we studied. And if you haven't practiced them, you need to start practicing them, because without them, you will not be able to make any sense of the flowcharts, nor will you be able to understand and learn them. And they're very important. So let's start with our first flowchart, which is the document flowchart. Now, before I go into this, I am a little bit disappointed with the number of students who have practiced, because this is something that is important for your success, and your success is important for me. And the effort that I try to put in is to make things as practical as possible so that you can take this to work, you can get help from this in your career. And this requires some actions from your side. And without that, this process will not be successful. So if I ask you to do something and you don't do it, this is not going to result in something good, because what I'm asking you to do is for your success, which is important to me, but it should be important to you as well, right? So if I jump up and down and post slides and give lectures and post exercises and do things like that, and there is no response from your side, then this is not going to work. Atif, you're saying you studied for the quiz. What quiz? The quiz is finished last Tuesday in my class. So I asked you to practice after the class and until this Sunday. There is no quiz today. There was no quiz after the last class. Okay, so I don't know which quiz for a different course. So if you think there is going to be only one thing at a time, one quiz, and you cannot do anything because of that, or one exam, you cannot do anything because of that, then this education system is going to disappoint you, because you will have multiple exams and quizzes and assignments at the same time. And I said from the beginning, you need to be prepared for them. You need to make time for them. If you can only focus on one exam or one project and one quiz, then this is not going to work too well for you. Okay, so you should be ready to address multiple things at the same time. Okay, let's go and get into the document flowchart. The document flowchart shows where a document comes from, where it's distributed to, how it's used, its ultimate disposition, and everything that happens to it. So we have multiple stages that a document goes through. A document, an example of a document would be, let's say, an invoice or a receipt or a bill. And the document flowchart shows what is the life story of that document. Where does it come from? Where was it used? And what happened to it after it was used? And everything else that happens in between. So let's take a look at a document flowchart. Here we have the same story that we discussed in the data flow diagram with a flowchart. So we have a payroll department and we have an accounts payable department, and activities are happening. What is going on here? In the human resources department, as we discussed, the employee change forms and the new employee data is prepared using standard forms. So these symbols represent documents, and you have the new employee data coming in a document, and you have employee changes data coming in another document. These two are sent to a manual process which is done without the help of a computer. And this manual process is updating the employee payroll file, which is stored in this manual file. This symbol represents a manual file or a manual storage where you have files and paperwork for each employee, and this is updated using a manual process without the help of a computer. The other side, which shows the departments where the time cards come from, and these time cards show the number of hours, the number of shifts the employees have worked. This again goes to another manual process, which is the preparation of paychecks and payroll registers. The payroll register is a list of all the employees who got paid during that period. So if it's a month, it shows all the names of the employees who got paid and the amounts they got paid, etc. Whenever you see the word register, it's a list. So for example, I have a register for this class which shows all the students who are registered for this class. In my class, their names, their student ID numbers, when they registered, their majors, etc. So here, this manual process prepares the paychecks, and it updates the payroll register, and the data for doing that comes from two places. One is the tax tables, where the tax rates are stored, and the preparer looks at that data, hence this dotted line. The dotted line is the data or information flow, and then any changed or updated employee information. So if the employee's salary was increased, the file is updated, and the preparer of the paycheck can look at this data from this file. Once this process is finished, we have the output here. The output is 2 copies of the employee checks. It's 1 and 2 copies of the same thing. 2 copies of the payroll register, 1 and 2. And then the time cards that were used, we have only 1 copy of that. 1 copy of the employee checks goes somewhere, and the somewhere is shown with this symbol right here. This symbol represents off-page connector. Off-page connector means these employee checks are sent somewhere to the next stage, to the next step, but this cannot be drawn on this page. So this is shown on a different page. If I go to the next page, I'm going to find a symbol right here. As you see, the same symbol, and we see the employee checks coming from that step is going to the next step. But where does it come from? It comes from the previous page, and this symbol represents that it is coming from the previous page. So if you go back to the previous page, you will see that this is where this is. This is, as I said I would explain to you in the last class, it's an off-page connector. It connects the story from this page to the next page. Another copy of the employee check, as you see, 1 copy of the payroll register, and the time cards, they all go to the storage. So you see this and this and this, these 3 things, 1 copy of each one of these is stored in the folder, in the manual file. 1 copy of the payroll register, as you see, goes up here and the story continues here, which we will come back to. Hamad has a question. The question is, we should save the shape and the description, right? What do you mean by that? Save the shape. What does save the shape mean? When you say save the shape, what do you mean by that? To draw it, yes. So you need to draw the story. If you're given a story, you need to draw the story using the symbols. And if you're given a story, you should be able to draw it and you should be able to label. So, you know, a document, right, is represented by the symbol. But what is the document? It's a check, right? Sharat says, repeat the off-page connector. Of course, this symbol right here represents that this story of this employee checks and this payroll report, they're going to another stage, but there is no space on this page left to continue the story. So for example, I have been coming from up here, I'm drawing, I'm going to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, and I'm stuck here because I don't have any space. So this story is going to continue on the next page, and the way I take this is by drawing this picture right here, and I say, okay, this story will continue the next page. And I put the symbol. The symbol represents off-page connector. When I go to the next page, I will find the same symbol that's coming from the previous page, and the story of the employee checks. What happens to it is continuing right here. Does it make sense? Okay. Now we go back here. We have the second part of this story of the payroll department is a monthly tax report is prepared manually using the data from this folder. So there is information here which is used to prepare the tax report. And again, exactly what a tax report is and what is included in there and so forth, it's not the goal of this lesson for you to understand that. The goal for this lesson is to understand what this symbol means and what is the story behind this symbol. The story behind this symbol is something is prepared manually. What is that thing? It is a report. How many copies? 2 copies, 1 and 2. What happens to those copies? One of these copies is saved here again in the file, and the other copy goes to the next stage. What is this next stage? You see this tax report, and there is this symbol right here. This symbol right here, it's called an on-page connector. On-page connector is this story is continuing on the same page but not immediately after this. So it is continuing right here, as you see the tax report is continuing right here. So this tax report goes to the next stage but on the other side of the page. Now if I wanted to draw an arrow, bring the down here all the way, pull it down here and then put it up here and go through here, it just makes the picture very messy. So to keep it clean, to maintain a good looking diagram, we use these on-page connectors. The story continues on the same page but not immediately after this because there is no space. So we take this and we put it on the other side of the same page. We are on the same page, but this is continuing here. So this represents an on-page connector. All right. Okay. The last story, the last piece on this department, in this department, is the preparation of payroll report, which is done using data from this storage. And again, this goes to the next page along with the employee checks, as you have seen. Okay, the story will continue on the next page. Okay, there's a question. Is there a specific reason on when to use a page connector and off-page connector? It depends on the space. If you run out of space, then you use the on page and the off page connector. So if I had space below this, I could continue the story, right? Uh, I could draw the accounts payable department and so forth, but I don't have space. So that's why all flowcharts are first drawn as a rough draft, and then it's organized based on how much space you need and where you need to move and so forth. And initially you're going to do this by hand, but when you draw this, for example, in a Word document, it's very easy to cut and paste it to the other side and put the off-page connector, right? So Sharat says, why didn't we use on-page connector for payroll register first copy? Because it's not needed. It's immediately in the next column, right? It's immediately in the next column. You can draw an arrow. It doesn't make the picture messy. If you wanted to do that, there is no problem in doing that. If you wanted to do that, it would not make the flowchart incorrect. So if you, for example, put an on connector here, and on-page connector here, and you started another on-page connector here, it would not be incorrect. But since this is clean, one arrow going here, it's not making the picture messy. Does it make sense, Shala? There is no hard and fast rule about using the on-page and the off-page connectors, right? It's think of it as this way. You're writing and you have a number of words that can go in one line and one paragraph and one page, and sometimes we put half the word in one line and you put a dash and you put the other half in the second line. There is no rule necessary that says that you cannot put the whole word in the next line, right? So it's more for cleanliness and neatness of the diagram. Does that answer? Then the standard size page is the standard size page we use. Right? The A4 pages are the standard pages for all documents. Remember, these flowcharts are in documents. So these are inside other text documents. So you have a narrative and then there is a flowchart, and it comes in the same size paper, right? In the book, for example, there are flowcharts. So it's in the size of the page of the book, normal size of the page, right? Atif says the more lengthy we use the off-page connector. Again, this is the off-page connector and the on-page connector is based on the judgment of the person who's drawing the flowchart. There is no strict rule that you have to use now an off-page connector. You cannot use an off-page connector, right? Or you have to use an on-page. You cannot use an on-page. It depends on. And the more you draw and you learn, you will get a system of your own. You will draw using a particular method, as long as you're following the guidelines of using the symbols correctly, as long as your reader can follow. So for example, if I have B here, this should be B here as well, so that my reader knows I will find B, a circle B, another time on this page. And if two letters don't match, right, if you put B here and you put C here, then the reader will get lost. Otherwise, you can draw as you wish. Okay, does that answer your questions? Sharat and Atif, answer your questions? Okay, very good. Now we have the payroll register, again going to another manual processing, which is the preparation of payroll checks and cash disbursement voucher. So the other documents, not necessary for you to understand what is a cash disbursement voucher and what these documents are. Two other documents are prepared. How many copies of each? Two copies of the payroll check, two copies of the payroll CD voucher, and then we have the payroll register that is coming from the previous step. All of these things are now going to the next stage. Where are they going? One copy of the payroll check, one copy of the payroll CD voucher, and one copy of the payroll register are stored in this folder, in this file, manual file right here. And one copy of the payroll check and one copy of the payroll CD voucher goes to the next page, which is right here, it symbolizes off-page connector. What happens to the it goes through another stage of manual preparation. What is prepared? Tax payment and CD voucher. How many copies? 2 copies of the tax payment check and 2 copies of the CD voucher. And then this tax report that we had here, it's going to the next stage as well. Where does it go? 1 copy of the tax payment and 1 copy of the CD voucher is stored here, right here, as you see in the folder, in the manual file. 1 copy of tax payment, 1 copy of the CD voucher, and 1 copy of the tax report goes to the next page using this off-page connector. Okay. Now we go to the next page and we have these documents, all of these documents, as we have discussed coming from the previous page, they all go to another manual processing, which is the approval and signature. So these reports are signed and they're sent to the next stage. What happens? The tax report and the signed payment, tax payment check goes to the government. Payroll CD voucher goes to the next stage in the same page on the on-page connector E right here. The signed payroll check goes to the bank. The payroll CD voucher again goes to the next stage on the same page. The employee checks go to the employees and the payroll tax report is saved in the storage. 1 copy of the payroll tax CD voucher and the payroll CD voucher, they go to another manual processing. The last stage is updating of the general ledger. So the general ledger has all the T accounts and the debits and the credits. Because of these new payments, the general ledger is updated, and then these 2 documents are stored in the manual process. Okay, now this is of the more complicated flowcharts among the 3, the document flowchart, the system flowchart, and the program flowchart. Now, I have posted in Blackboard a flowchart, a few flowchart questions for you to draw, and I need you to first practice the symbols, and then following the symbols, I need you to draw the flowcharts and then compare your answers with the solutions. And then I'm going to practice with you more before the exam. Okay? So I'm going to continue on, Omar. I'm going to continue on with the flowcharts because we have the system and the program flowchart to discuss. I need you to do the practice that I have posted in Blackboard, and then I will discuss further your questions and answers. Okay? Any other questions? Any other queries? Okay, now this email I already showed you last week, the importance of drawing the symbols. Omar Amin says the questions on the exam will be the same as the exercises. I'm going to give you practices before the exam on the types of questions that are going to be in the exam. But understand, you should not be worried, and I do not like questions that are solely directed to the exam. The exam is just a means to test your knowledge. The goal is not for you to grade high in the exams and that's it. The goal is for you to learn. And I displayed to you in the last class. This is something that is useful in real practice. So your goal should be, how can I learn this? Not necessarily what type of questions is going to be in the exam. Nonetheless, I'm going to practice with you questions that are going to be similar to the exam. But you should first start drawing the symbols and learning them, and then follow the instructions that I'm giving you. Okay? So I'm not sure I understand what you mean here. Do we have to understand the flows more from a real life basis? What does that mean? I mean, how the drafts data flow from one organization to another. This is data flowing from one step to the other. So the employees are getting paid by the payroll department, and how is that data processed, right? So this is something that happens in every organization. What I've just shown you, other than the tax in Qatar, the steps are pretty much the same. But again, if you're struggling with the symbols, if you have to understand first that, okay, is this a document or is this a manual process and so forth, then it makes the thing even more complicated. So learning the symbols is step number one. So that's why when we teach a new language, you first learn the alphabets, and then you start forming words and paragraphs. But uh, if you do not learn the symbols first, it will be all the more difficult. So practice the symbols like I have asked you to do, and then come back to the exercises that I have posted. This is even after you have practiced the symbols, the flowcharts, because you didn't do anything similar to this before. This is initially a little bit complicated. It looks a little bit complicated, but once you practice the symbols and you practice the flowcharts, and I will practice with you some more. Once you do that, once you're able to draw them, draw a few of them, you will see that they're not all that complicated. It will need a little bit of practice and a little bit of work, but after that, this will become easy, inshallah. Okay? So don't fear, but do as I'm asking you to do, and inshallah you will be fine. Okay? We will look at two more that are simpler than the one that we looked at. So it will make more sense to you, inshallah. Does that answer your question, Atif? Okay. Now we go to the next type of flowchart, which is called the system flowchart. It shows the relationship among input, processing, and output. Let's take a look at how it looks. You see here, we have a story of a customer buying from a supermarket, and then the supermarket processing the data, right? So let's start here. This is the sales terminal. This is the display, and this is the keyboard. So this is the computer terminal where the sales clerk is sitting. If you go to, let's say, Lulu or Carrefour, they have this in front of them. So they scan, they take your items, and they use a computerized processing system to process your sales. So they take the items, they add to the system, and then the system generates a receipt right here, which is given to the customer. And this data that they have processed stored in a magnetic disk. This symbol did not come out properly, but this is a magnetic disk of the sales data. So this is the sales data, all the sales that took place during, let's say, a day or a week. This sales data is for all the customers that purchased goods from the supermarket. This data now is sent to another location, let's say from the supermarket to the accounting office, using this symbol. This symbol represents the transfer of documents and data to another location. So it goes to another location, and it goes through another computerized processing, which says summarize the sales data and print batch totals. So the sales initially is read by customers, let's say. Then it comes here and they recategorize the data. So they have batch totals, and the batch totals could be of different types. For example, it could be based on shifts. It could be first half of the day, second half of the day, or it could be based on department, for example, the electronics, the food items, etc. So this batch totals are prepared, this document is prepared based on the sales data that is collected from the supermarket. And this data is also stored in the daily sales transaction file. So again, this data is daily sales transaction file, which stores the daily sales data. So whatever sales took place in a particular day, it is stored in this magnetic disk. All right. This daily sales transaction file goes to another computer processing, which is updating the database. So there are databases, these storages, accounts receivable, inventory, sales, and general ledger. These are magnetic disks, different folders, different files, different storages, where the data from the previous periods have been recorded, and this daily transaction files are added. So all the accounts receivable payments received or added is added to the old information. The inventory database is updated, the sales database is updated, and the general ledger is updated. So this storage is updated based on the sales that took place. This process also generates another batch total. So we have two batch totals, one generated from this first process, another generated from the second process. And these two batch totals are compared. They should match. If they match, that means the data coming from these two processes are verified and they meet the verifiability qualities. So this first process prepared the batch totals, the second process prepared the batch totals, and they should match. If they don't match, if there is some differences, then they are compared and reconciled with a manual process. Some accountant looks at this batch total and this batch total, then they see if there are any differences. If they do not agree, why they don't agree, and so forth. This is what they're doing here. And this is the end of this process. So again, the process is customer buys, gets a receipt, the data is sent to the accounting office. The accounting office produces a batch total and it sends to the daily transaction file, which is then used to update these storages. And the update also generates another batch total, and these two batch totals are compared, and these databases are updated. This is the end of this first stage of this picture. Okay. Omar says, how can they not be equal, sir? Aren't it all on computers and automatic? Yes, they are computers generated and automatic, but there are edits. So for example, there are ranges of data that are taken. So for example, you could put the wrong time frame or the wrong department codes or the wrong dates, and you could add in a report that may not match with the one that was done correctly. So when you will use the computerized AIS, you will enter the same data and another of your colleague will enter the same data, and when you generate the report, you will see that your report is not matching the report of another of your friends, and you will find that when you selected the dates or you selected the account numbers, somehow you made a mistake, somehow you did not add the right items, or maybe you left out some of the items that were added into the report. So the report actually is generated based on the data already stored, but your selection of the items could make the reports different. Okay, I'll give you an example. Let me answer Omar's question and I'll come to you, Atif. Let me give you an example. Let's say you go to Blackboard and you want to look at all the classes that are offered on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday from 3:30 until 4:45. So you generate a report based on what's in the Blackboard, and another friend of yours generates a report. But your friend forgets to click on the accounting button, which will only identify the accounting courses. So his report will generate a different set of courses than yours, and the two reports will not match, right? Because you did not click or you did not select the right selections. Does that make sense, Omar? Does it answer your question how the batch totals could be different? You could leave out a department, you could leave out an inventory item, you could put the wrong date. All of these things could make your batch totals different. Does that answer your question? Okay. Now, Atif, what are batch totals? Batch totals are the sales based on different batches. So, for example, if I wanted to look at the sales from 8 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock, which is the first shift, and let's say the second shift is from 1 o'clock until 5 o'clock. So, if I wanted to see the sales from the first batch, right, I would select 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. and I will see the sales during that time. If I wanted to see the batch totals based on the department, so if each department is processed separate in separate batches, so I would look at the electronic goods, I would look at the food items, I would look at the pharmacy. So I would have different, the sales would be by different batches, right? Do you follow? Does that answer your question, Atif? Okay. Shouldn't there be an arrow from the reconciled file to the databases? No, there is no change to the data, right? So remember, like you said, the data is the same. The selection of preparing the batch totals is different because of some selection of the criteria was wrong. So if it was incorrect, they could generate another batch totals because the data is coming from the same place, right? So there is no update. They will just reproduce the batch totals with the right selections and they will match. Okay? Now we have the process is finished. This bottom page right here shows that if somebody wanted to look at the data stored in this, they could use their own computer screens and they could inquire with the system. They could ask for, let's say, a particular customer account status. They could see whether the customer's account was updated or whether the inventory was updated or whether the sales analysis was updated. So they could use these screens to inquire from these databases using the computer software. So let's say the schedules for all the classes are here and you're looking at the schedules using your computers using the banner system, right? So this is that. This bottom part is showing that the different departments could look at the database and look at the data the way they want to, okay, in their own computer monitors. Does it make sense? Okay. Any other questions related to this? Okay, all your questions are good questions, which means you're following, mashallah, very good. Okay, move on. The last one is a program flowchart, which is the easiest among the three to understand. It shows the logical operations of a computer program. So what happens here? We have the 4 stages of the data processing cycle: the input, the process, the output, and the storage. And inside this box, this is the computer processing. We have the computer program flowchart that is run here. The computer goes through these stages. First, you input the data in the computer. So let's say you're entering Blackboard and you enter your username and you enter your password. And the computer goes through a calculation. It sees whether the condition is met, whether your username and your password matches. If it matches, then the computer performs the calculation, meaning it lets you enter the system and it updates the record saying that so and so student number so and so entered the board at 4:14 on the 6th of September. If the username and password does not match, then it says no, and you come back to the input screen and it says re-enter the username or password, because your username or password is incorrect, right? So each one of these questions, the computer answers with a yes or a no. Either the computer is answering with a 0 or a 1, a no or a yes. And if you put in multiple criterias, if you put in a number of conditions, the computer checks each condition one at a time using yes or no. So let's say you're going to the banner system and you say, I want to look at all the accounting courses that are offered on Sundays and Thursdays at 3:30 p.m. Search. So the computer will go through all the courses. ACCT, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Sunday, Tuesday, UTR, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. 3:30, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And it will bring those that have answered yes. And you know there are many, many courses, but the computer can do this very fast. But if many users ask the computer to do it at the same time, then the computer has a maximum capacity and it slows down. And if it is beyond, way beyond the maximum capacity, then it fails. So this is what happens when many people are trying to enter Blackboard at the same time, or many students are trying to enter the banner at the same time. It is overloaded and the computer cannot check the conditions and let you enter, right? So this is what happens. But the computer, if it is within its capacity, it can do it very quickly. Does it make sense? Okay, so this is the computer programming. This is what's happening inside this box. Input, condition is met, go to the next stage, update the record, condition is not met, come back to the previous stage and give a message that this is not the right information. And this can happen in uh, any software. For example, when you do spell check, the computer says that this word is not one of the words found in the dictionary. There are no suggestions for this word. This word is incorrect, but you can ignore and you can go with it, right? There is nothing that matches this word or anywhere close to this word. Or if there is something close, it will give the suggestions that it could be this, 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 or this, and you can select one. So it goes through the calculation of looking at each letter and each word, and then it gives you the suggestions. Okay, this is the easiest of the three types of flowcharts that we have. All right, any questions? Okay, now we go to the flowchart preparation guidelines. The normal course of an operation in a flowchart, most of this is common sense. Obviously you have the input first, and then you have the processing, and then you have the output. And then you have the annotation of the exceptions. Remember the symbol that shows you can write in addition to drawing any explanation, and that is called the annotation. So this is on the side that is drawn, a box, an open box is drawn on the side, and you can write any explanation if your drawing is not 100% clear. Give the flowchart a clear beginning and a clear ending when you're drawing so that it is not difficult for the reader to understand. The flow should be from top to bottom and from left to right, just like we write English. It should not go from bottom to left. You should not start at the bottom and then go up. You should not start from the right and go to your left. It should be from left to right and top to bottom, just like the English language. Use standard size symbols. So the symbols, when you're drawing them, it should not be out of proportion. You should not draw one symbol very large and another symbol very small. They should all be proportionate, similar size. Use separate columns for activity of each entity or department, like we did on our flowchart, the payroll department and the accounts payable department. Then clearly label all symbols and annotate explanations as needed, right? Putting the symbols the text inside the symbol. So this is a tax report, or this is a payroll check, like that. Every process has a minimum of one input and one output. So in a process, you have to have input and output. Without an input and output, there is no process. Do not connect two documents except when forwarding to another column, like you have seen in the flowchart. And after you have practiced drawing the symbols, you can listen to the explanation of the flowchart, the video that we have that is recorded, and it will make more sense to you, inshallah. You will find there that all documents that are going to the next stage, they are connected together. Number multiple copy documents on the upper right side. So the 1, 2, 3 copies are on the upper right side of the document. If a flowchart takes more than one page, label the pages as 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5. So if one page is lost, you know that this document is supposed to have 5 pages. Show documents first in the column where they are created. So it should appear first when the document is prepared in the same column, and then it goes to the next column or the next stage. Start with a rough draft to avoid clutter. So the rough draft helps you organize the symbols and decide when to use an off page or an on page connector, so that it does not become messy. It is easy to follow. Verify the accuracy of your flowchart by reviewing it with the users. So if you're drawing a flowchart for a department, let's say, and you don't work for that department, you can review the flowchart with somebody in that department, and you can explain to them, this is what I have drawn. Is this what you do, or is what you do different from what I have drawn? And you can make adjustments. If they say, no, this is correct, this is correct, this is not correct, so you can change that. But the person who's working in that department would have a better idea of the stages, of the steps, than someone who's not working. Place the flowchart name, the date, and the preparer's name on each page. So if you're drawing a flowchart, the name and the date and the preparer's name, the name of the flowchart, the preparer's name, and the date should appear in each one of the pages, so that if anybody has a question, they can go to the preparer and ask. Okay, so these are all the symbols, all the flowchart preparation guidelines. They're pretty much straightforward. You should, once you start drawing them, you will know these guidelines without necessarily having to sit and memorize them. If you practice drawing, all of these rules will automatically come to you. There's a question that says, is there a format of the date and the name? There is no format of the date and the name that is prescribed by the guideline, but your organization might have a format. So if you work for a particular company, they have their own rules, so you have to follow what they do. Otherwise, it's not strict, it is flexible. Okay. Now we come to our last slide, which is, why is it important for us to learn the flowcharts? And as you will see, as we go through these three requirements, you will know that you cannot actually practice accounting or auditing without learning the flowcharts and without being good at the flowcharts. The first point here, it says SAS 94. SAS stands for statement on auditing standards. Statement on auditing standards. There are statements on auditing standards. Statement on auditing standards number 94 says that it requires auditors to understand the procedures an entity uses. Now, the procedures that any entity uses, if you go to an organization, you go to an entity and you want to know how they do the work, their work is drawn using the flowcharts. And if you want to understand what the procedures are, you have to be able to read the flowcharts, right? And this is the email that I was showing you the other day from one of my former students, who was shown a flowchart, and he was able to identify in that flowchart something that was an unnecessary step, and he recommended that that step be stopped, which saved the company more than 100,000, or at least $100,000. So without the executive understanding the flowchart, he or she won't be able to identify any problem with the process. So SaaS requires the accountants, the auditors to understand, and to understand the procedures, the flowcharts are a must. The second is SOX 2002, which is another regulation, requires public companies and their auditors to document and test the company's internal controls. Now, I want to take a few minutes to talk about internal controls. Internal controls in any organization has three goals, and the goals are to put in place procedures to ensure, number one, preparation of true and fair financial statements. Number two, effective and efficient operations. And number three, compliance with regulations. Okay, so we have three things going on here. The internal controls in any organization puts in place certain procedures that ensure, number one, the preparation of true and fair financial statements. Procedures would include, for example, hiring a qualified accountant, training the accountant, reviewing the work of the accountant, buying the right accounting software to help the accountant prepare the financial statements. So all of these are procedures in place that ensure the preparation of a true and fair financial statement for the company. The second goal of the company when it comes to internal controls is to have effective and efficient operations. Effective means to do the right thing, and efficient means to do it with the least amount of resources. So let's say making wudu, making ablution, you have to wash each part, your hands and your faces and so forth, with water and make sure it's wet. That's effective. Efficient is to do it with very small amount of water without wasting any water. So in an organization, the effective and efficient operation is similar to this. If you want to produce goods, you want to make sure that the goods are of highest quality. You put in place some procedures that will ensure the quality, and you will also put in place some procedures that will ensure that you do not have any waste. So you would put some procedures in place that makes the process efficient. You do not have people wasting time or inventory or computer resources, etc. So internal controls, second goal is to have procedures in place that ensure effective and efficient operations. The third goal is to comply with regulations. The third goal of every organization is to put in place certain procedures that ensure that it is following the government regulations. For example, in Qatar, every employee must have a valid Qatari residency permit, and if it expires, you have to renew it. Otherwise, the employee becomes illegal to work and stay in Qatar. So following that regulation is necessary, and the company has perhaps a department or it has an employee that looks at the dates and keeps track of the dates of the expiration for the IDs, and it renews. So for example, at Qatar University, 3 months or 6 months before the ID expires, we get an email saying that bring your ID and we need to renew it. So this is an internal control that is put in place to comply with the regulation, to follow the regulation, to follow the rules of the land. Okay? Does this make sense? What I'm telling you about the internal rules? You understand the goals of the internal controls? Okay? So let me ask you, there is an internal control that is put in place before you can enter any building anywhere in Qatar right now. What is that internal control? The ihtiraz, very good, Omar. What else? The temperature check, excellent. The mask, excellent. Okay, right? The security is also another internal control. Now, which category would you put this in the three categories? Which internal control category does it fall into? Is it financial statements? Is it operations? Is it compliance? Which one? Sharat says number 3. It's compliance. Is it only compliance, or is it compliance and something else? It is 2 and 3, right? It could be more than one, because you do not want your employees to become sick from a customer who's sick. So that is your effective. If your employees become sick, your operations will suffer, right? So you want both the compliance as well as the operations from this, right? Now, let me give you another example. When you're crossing the road, when you're on campus at the university, when you're crossing the road, the security guard stops the cars that are coming so that you can cross the road, right? Have you noticed that? Have you seen that when you're on campus? Have you experienced this? Which category would you put that in? I would put it in number 2. Very good. You would put it in number 2. Uh, it's only number 2 because the government does not require. However, the university requires that. So maybe because of the accident that took place, after that there is a regulation. I'm not sure. It could be, but at least it is for sure number 2, which is to have a safe environment, a safe operation for the students to walk around campus. Okay, so I hope this is clear. SOX 2002 requires public companies and their auditors to document and test the company's internal controls. And the internal control procedures are drawn using the flowcharts. So without understanding the flowcharts, the auditors won't be able to understand the internal controls. The last point on this slide is auditing standard number 2 requires external auditors to express an opinion on the client's internal controls. So the auditors must look at the internal controls and say the internal control is strong or it is weak. And the only way they can do that is if they can read the flowcharts where the internal controls are documented. It's documented using the flowcharts. So the auditors must know how to read the flowcharts, otherwise they won't be able to understand the details of the internal controls. All right. So this brings us to the end of this chapter. I need you to do number 1, draw the symbols, review the video of the flow chart of this lecture that we recorded today, and number 3, do the practice exercises. Once you have done this, you can ask me questions if you have any questions. The solutions are posted or will be posted. The exercises will be posted, but they won't be posted today. So you can look at the exercises. You can do the exercises after you practice the symbols, and then you can do the exercises and then look at the solutions. And then I am available for you to ask me questions and to help you learn. Your success is very important for me. I need you to be the next student who sends me that email that this actually helped you in your work. If it does not, then we are just learning some things that are not useful. So what we learn here is practical and it's useful, and I need you to do your part so that you can be a successful executive, inshallah. And all of you are smart, otherwise you won't be here. So it's hard work, but it's only for a few years, and then you will enjoy the fruits of it when you become executives, and when you are at good positions, you will enjoy the fruit of this. So my students, my children, take it seriously, do a little bit of hard work, and this will give you fruits in the future, inshallah. Inshallah. Okay. All right. So this is the last of chapter, end of chapter 3. The next assignment that we have, which is the computerized AIS, and the exam of the computerized AIS is 1 month from now, which is October 4th, inshallah. In the Blackboard at 5 p.m. will come available, or it's probably available right now, the step-by-step instructions on how to set up an account in Wave Accounting and do the first practice. And you can print the instructions. I went through each screenshot, and I took a screenshot of every stage, and I have prepared a step-by-step instructions for you to follow to do the computerized AIS exercise. So you start working on that, and if you get stuck or you have any questions, at the end of every lecture from now on until we finish the computerized exam, I'm going to allow you a few minutes, 15-20 minutes, for you to ask me questions, and I'm going to go to the software myself, and I'm going to show you any difficulty you're having. I'm going to show you how to do it, how to fix it if you don't understand something. But you need to start working on it first. The best thing is to print the instructions. It's a few pages, it's 56 pages. But if you do print them, then you can put it on your side and you can work on the software in your computer, and you don't have to go between 3 different screens. This is going to make it easy for you. Once you do the first practice, the solution will be available to you in Blackboard as well. But don't look at the solution first. Go and follow the instructions and start working on it. This is one of the exercises, this is one of the exams where you can score full marks if you follow the guidelines and if you do a little bit of practice. So altogether, let's say less than 10 hours of total practice will get you prepared for the exam, which is on October 4th. You don't have to do these 10 hours all at once, but if you start now and you do 1 or 2 or 3 hours of practice every week, then you will be ready, inshallah, for doing the exercise in the exam, right? And the reason why I'm mentioning the exam, because the exam is something that is practical. So you will do everything that you learn in here in the exam, and the more times you practice, the better it will be for you. Now, this is something that is very, very practical, and this I can guarantee you, no matter which organization you work at, as an accountant or as a business executive, this is something you will have to experience. This is something that you will have to do. So if you can learn this right now in this class, the first day you go to work, you will start using the software with some level of comfort because you have worked in it before. Okay, so this is something that is very useful. And when I graduated back in 1999 in my accounting information system class, the companies were already using these softwares, but we never looked at one or we never touched one until the first day I went to work. And this was just brand new. I never looked at anything like this. And, you know, I was somewhat scared that whether I would be able to do this or not. It took me some time to master it, because there are other things going on when you go to a job, not just a software, but many things. Everything is new and everything is a learning experience, so it's overwhelming. And add to that this software. So if the software is at least somewhat under your control, then it is one less thing you have to worry about when you start your work. Does that make sense? Right, this will help you, inshallah. It will help you become successful. Any questions? anything unclear of what I'm asking you to do, these are available in Blackboard, so you can download them and you can start working on them. And it is fun. You will find it not boring, inshallah. Okay. All right. If you don't have any other questions, we'll end, inshallah, and I will see you on Tuesday. Okay. You're all very welcome. It is my pleasure having you, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.